Hey guys, and welcome to the Fish Room. I'm Rachel O'Leary and it's time for a species spotlight. Originally I thought I would talk to you guys about the blue Rilly shrimp or blue dream shrimp or blue diamond shrimp, but the more I thought about it, the more confusing I thought that would be, because there are easily 10 different blue Neocaridina shrimp on the market. So what I've done is gathered together the various Neocaridina species that I'm working with to explain to you a few key things about these names, about the care of these shrimp, and to give you my opinion on what colors can mix, can't mix, etc. So as you guys remember from my cherry shrimp video, they've been around for a very long time, since about 2003, and they originate from a wild Taiwanese shrimp that were line bred to get that bright red coloration, and they're classified as Neocaridina davidi. There's another species of Neocaridina, the only other one that I know of that's currently classified, called Neocaridina palmata. Now palmata are typically the ones that you see in the hobby, although infrequently at this point, as blue pearls or snowballs or white diamonds, things like that. And those two are technically different species, the cherries and the snowballs, for instance. So if you were to mix those two, technically you're creating a hybrid. A hybrid is when you mix two beings that are different species to create offspring. Now the tricky part with dwarf shrimp is that because there's only two main classifications and they've been line bred so dramatically to create the sort of rainbow of colors, mixing colors is not always technically hybridization. It's simply line breeding and selective breeding and working with genetics that are pretty much poorly understood to create a desired color form. And you do that by breeding the shrimp, then picking out any undesirable shrimp and either calling them or putting them in another tank separate from your breeding colony, and then picking your best expression female and a couple best expression males and breeding them again and repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse until you get a line that is consistently throwing the same color form. Now since cherry shrimp, which are these guys, have been the ones that have been around the longest, they're the ones that have been worked with the most, and that's where your yellows come from, your oranges, chocolates, carbons, most of your blues, almost all of your Rillies. But the wild forms, the palmata, have also been worked with, and they have a lot of the similar color expressions. So it gets really tricky, and it really comes down to the importer, the exporter, to know what they're getting so that you have a clue what you're putting in your tank. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. A lot of the line breeding takes, 5 to 10 years to really isolate out a very good line bred color form. So depending on the breeder, they give it a different name, and this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. Taiwanese breeders will call them one thing, German breeders will call them another. None of us are really clear on what exact species we're working with or what exactly has gone into creating that species. So you end up with shrimp with a ton of different names. So what I'm going to do is show you ones that are readily available in the American hobby, tell you what the most common names for those are, and go over a little bit about their husbandry. So let's take a look. I think most people at this point are relatively familiar with cherry shrimp. I've been keeping them since 2003 when they first hit the American market. And because they've been around for so long, they're considered the best beginner shrimp. Their genetics are very stable, and they're available in the hobby for a relatively affordable price. You can find them anywhere from $1 to $5 depending on grade. Now by grade I mean some of these shrimp have been line bred, called as I mentioned, in order to increase the opacity of the red, not just in the body but also the legs of and the antenna. And that's where the grades of Sakura or Painted Fire Red or Bloody Mary, etc. come from. The higher the degree of the opacity of the red on the legs, the antenna, and the body, the better the grade of the shrimp. That doesn't mean that you can't start out with a lesser quality and call it yourself to get that degree. Now around the same time that cherries were introduced, or a few years later, the wild types were introduced. These are a Neocaridina palmata. You can see there's quite a bit of variability with a bunch of speckling, some lines, some dots. But all in all, they have a relatively transparent carapace or body, and their color is not as striking as those that have been line bred. Now these are a completely different species from your cherry. These are being line bred to produce yellows, to produce various rillies, and sometimes are even mixed or hybridized with the cherry to create new color forms. Often you'll hear about when you mix dwarf shrimp that you'll end up with a wild type variation, and this is the kind of colors that they're talking about. And that doesn't happen overnight. If you mix color forms, initially you'll get quite a few nice looking shrimp, but if you don't cull and you don't remove offspring of lesser quality over time, you'll end up with a lot of these. Shortly after cherry shrimp, the Taiwanese breeders started line breeding to remove sections of opacity, to produce a Neocaridina shrimp that resembled more of a crystal red, but had the durability and hardiness of a Neocaridina, taking that wide range of parameters from 6 to 8, temperatures from the 60s to the 80s, and a wide range of hardnesses. And these were labeled Rilly shrimp. And what that is when there's patches of color and transparency, as seen here in these red Rillies. Now after a while, quite a few of us started noticing that we would get blue bodies to these red Rillies, and eventually the red parts would turn blue as the shrimp matured, and that's where the first blue Neos came from. They're a derivative of these red Rillies. And those are the ones that you often saw called blue dreams, blue diamonds, blue velvets. When this first started happening in the hobby, I was like, what the heck? We just spent years getting all these shrimp nice and dark, and now we're breeding clear patches in. It seemed kind of counterintuitive, but they are definitely lovely. There are a couple Davidii wild types that are available in the hobby, one of which is chocolate. And when you mix chocolate shrimp, these guys here, with a good quality cherry red or a painted fire red, you get the blue diamond shrimp, which have that a lot more opacity to their carapace. The blue is a darker color blue as opposed to a frosty color blue. Now chocolates are often line bred on their own right because they're really quite lovely when you reinforce them, like this big female in the foreground. But when mixed with cherries, they can create a blue-bodied shrimp that's really dark, almost like a midnight blue, and they're really lovely. And again, this isn't technically hybridization because they're the same species. Then we have carbons. Now carbons were one of the first Rillies, and you can see there's a bunch of variability, and these have more of a natural blue-black color, and these are where your blue dreams came from. Isolating and line breeding these guys till that black turned more of a blue-black made for some really beautiful blue shrimp. Again, it's just a result of line breeding. And here's an example of some of the blues I'm working with. Now these express a lot of really genetics. Here are the blues I'm working with, most likely which are derived from a carbon. And I only say that because you can see the degree of the black blue to the Rilly portion of the shrimp. And these are very good examples of Rilly shrimp with a very dark tail and head portion and the transparency to the body. Now these shrimp also throw solid blues, so I tend to isolate them out based on their characteristics. This is a Rilly tank where I'm trying to strengthen that dark blue and maintain that center clear portion to the body. You can see that they're a really dark, deep blue, which happens to be my preference. Really, really lovely shrimp. Another one of the original color forms available in the hobby were yellows, and there's a wide range of variability in the color available with these guys. Some of them get a really dark, deep golden color with a broad stripe down their back, and some are like these that are simply a lovely lemon color the whole way throughout. Another variant is what are commonly called pumpkin shrimp or the orange shrimp. And there's a fair amount of variability with them as well. And keep in mind, almost all of these color forms are being produced in that really variation with the clear or transparent is more accurate patch in the middle of their body. Now all of these shrimp are relatively easy. They all thrive in a tank that has a pH anywhere in the 7s, middle of the road GH and KH, and a temperature ranging from 64 to 82 with mid-70s being ideal. When I set them up in a tank, I like to add some plants and some dark substrate. Neocaridinas in particular seem to exhibit the best coloration when they're on a dark substrate. I prefer to keep all my color variations separate. I prefer to call out the lesser specimens. I like to call out all the lesser specimens so that I can maintain a level of quality within the various types I work with. There's nothing wrong with line breeding, but until there's a better understanding of the genetics, keep in mind if you mix color forms, what you're going to end up with eventually, unless you put in a lot of hard work, are shrimp that look like these. Now all the Neocaridina are what we call high order breeders, which means they give birth to miniature versions of the parents. They carry about 30 eggs, which hatch after about 3 weeks, and they're exceptionally tiny. You can see on this female in the plant how little those eggs are. So each baby shrimp is like the size of a dash mark on a keyboard. And this means that for best results, if you want to breed shrimp, you should not keep them with any fish. The babies are just too small. That isn't to say that they can't be mixed with shrimp. You just need to identify your goals. If your goal is to breed shrimp, keep them in a species tank. Trust me, they're active, engaging, fun, exciting creatures to keep. And they don't take up a lot of space, though I do think that a larger dilution tank makes your life a lot easier. My smallest size range that I like to work with shrimp in is a 10-gallon, with 20 long being more ideal. Not because of their bioload, simply because of keeping the tank parameters stable. These guys have a negligible bioload, but they are completely intolerant to fluctuations of parameters. That means a well-cycled tank is an absolute must. Hope that helps. Are you guys lost yet? I hope not. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my species spotlights or Tuesday tips. As always, thanks for the donations and the continued support. Make sure you stop by my Facebook as well as my website, MsJinx.com, where you can find my upcoming speaking engagements, my current stock list, and information on all things nano. A reminder that I will be in Schaumburg, Illinois for the Aquatic Experience the first weekend of November. I hope to see a lot of you there, and if you come, make sure you stop by and say hello.